I always thought that when a marriage starts to crack, you hear it. A tiny sound at first, barely noticeable, like a floorboard creaking under too much weight. But the truth is, you don't hear a thing. The break happens in silence, behind smiles and routine conversations, behind the way she still kisses you on the cheek before leaving the house but somehow feels miles away when she's sitting next to you on the couch. That's how it started with Emilia. We'd been married for 7 years. Long enough for comfort, long enough for patterns to set in. And long enough for me to see the shift. At first, it was small things. A new perfume, something expensive, something not for me. A sudden obsession with her appearance. I told myself she just wanted to feel good. But then came the late-night phone checks, the whispered calls that ended when I walked into the room, the way she started going out more often, always with some vague excuse about a girls' night or an old friend from college. But the real gut punch? The moment I knew, without a doubt, that something was wrong, it was the way she stopped wanting me. Emilia had always been passionate. She was the one who used to initiate things between us, pulling me toward her in the middle of the kitchen, laughing as we stumbled upstairs. But now? Now, there was always an excuse. Too tired. Too stressed. Not in the mood. That was the moment I realized something. She wasn't losing interest in sex, she was just having it somewhere else, and I had to know, not just who he was. Not just how long it had been going on. I needed to know if she would betray me without hesitation. If she was the kind of woman who would take the bait the second she thought she had a better offer. So I made a decision that I wasn't going to follow her. I wasn't going to snoop through her phone. That I was going to set a trap, and I was going to watch her walk straight into it. That I didn't just want to catch Emilia cheating. I wanted to see what kind of woman she really was. Was she sneaking around behind my back because of some passionate, uncontrollable love affair? Or was she the type who would betray me at the first opportunity if the price was high enough? I decided to find out. So I hired someone. Not a private investigator. Not a hacker. No, I hired an actor. A professional, someone who could seduce my wife under the guise of being a rich, powerful man. His name was Daniel. Early 30s, sharp-dressed, confident, the kind of guy women gravitate toward without even realizing it. He specialized in roles like this: corporate setups, undercover business deals, even loyalty tests for people who suspected their partners might stray. I explained the plan. Your job is simple, I told him. Find her. Approach her. Make her believe you're wealthy, influential, someone who can give her something better than what she has. Flirt with her. Lead her on. And most importantly, I paused. Get her to agree to a date. Daniel smirked. So you want to see if she takes the bait? I nodded. I don't want to suspect anymore. I want to know. And so, the game began. With my approval, Daniel created an identity: a high-powered investor, someone who had just come into serious money. He was smooth, well-dressed, the kind of man Emilia would want to impress. The next part was easy. He found her at a cafe she frequented, alone. I had given him all the details: where she liked to go, how she liked her coffee, even the way she always tucked her hair behind her ear when she was interested in a conversation. Daniel made his move. A casual compliment. A friendly conversation. And just like that, she took the bait. She laughed. She twirled her hair. She leaned in, and then, the final moment, Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek business card, and slid it across the table. You seem like someone worth getting to know, he said smoothly. Call me sometime. Emilia took it. She held onto it like it was something precious, and later that night, she called him, not just to talk. To set up a date, and that was all I needed to hear, because the next time Emilia stepped into a restaurant expecting to meet her new, rich lover, she wouldn't find Daniel. She would find me. The night of the date arrived faster than I expected. Emilia had no idea she was walking into a trap. I had spent the past few days watching her, waiting to see if she'd back out, if she'd hesitate. But she didn't. Not once. In fact, she was excited. She spent extra time in the mirror, trying on different dresses, testing different shades of lipstick. I stood in the doorway, watching as she admired herself, oblivious to the fact that I knew exactly what she was doing, going out with the girls again? I asked casually, my voice steady. She barely looked at me. Yeah. It's been too long. A lie? She spritzed on perfume, something expensive, something not for me. I nodded, acting as if I believed her. Have fun. She smiled. Kissed my cheek. Like she wasn't about to betray me. I waited exactly 20 minutes before I left the house that I already knew where she was going, an upscale restaurant downtown, one that Emilia had always talked about but claimed we couldn't afford. But tonight? She was going there. For him, the drive was a blur, my hands tightening around the wheel with every mile. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. By the time I arrived, the restaurant was buzzing with the kind of crowd that Emilia would have loved to be a part of, wealthy, well-dressed, expensive. I walked past the valet, through the grand entrance, and spotted her almost immediately. There she was, sitting at a dimly lit table near the window, glancing at her phone, waiting for Daniel, waiting for a man who didn't exist. I walked up to the table slowly, my footsteps steady, deliberate. She didn't notice me at first. Her eyes were locked on the entrance, waiting for her mysterious rich lover to arrive. Then she looked up and everything stopped. Her face went pale, her lips parted slightly, a breath hitching in her throat, because I was standing in front of her, not Daniel. Not the man she had agreed to meet, her husband. For a moment, she didn't move. She just sat there, frozen, like her brain was still trying to process the impossible. Then, finally, she whispered, "Thomas." I pulled out the chair across from her, sat down, and smiled, expecting someone else. Her eyes darted around the restaurant, panic creeping in. She had nowhere to run. I leaned in slightly, keeping my voice calm. "Go ahead. Tell me, Emilia. Who were you waiting for?" She opened her mouth and the lies began. Emilia blinked rapidly, her lips parting, closing, then parting again, like she was scrambling for the right lie. I sat there, watching her. "Waiting, Thomas," she said finally, her voice breathy, forced. "What are you doing here?" I tilted my head slightly, amused. Interesting choice of words. Not "why are you here?" Not "how did you find me?" But "what are you doing here?" Like I was the one out of place. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression calm. "I should be asking you that." She swallowed hard. I could see the gears turning in her head, her fingers twitching against the white tablecloth as she forced a nervous smile. "I was meeting a friend," she said. I almost laughed. That's the best she could come up with, a friend? I repeated. Funny. Because I happen to know that your friend doesn't exist. Her breath hitched. Just for a second. Just long enough. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to sound indignant, offended. "Thomas, why are you acting so strange? Still lying, even now." Even when she had been caught red-handed. I exhaled slowly. "You're waiting for a man named Daniel," I said evenly. "A wealthy businessman who charmed you at a cafe, gave you his number, and invited you to dinner at this exact restaurant." Her hands clenched into fists in her lap. I cut her off. "And you agreed?" She shook her head. "No, you called him," I continued. "You set this up. You planned this." I paused. "The only problem? Daniel isn't real." The color drained from her face. I leaned forward slightly, dropping my voice lower. "He was never real, Emilia. I hired him. To see if you'd take the bait." I let the word settle. "And you did." She stared at me, horrified. I could see the moment the truth fully registered. Then, suddenly tears, fake. Forced, she reached for my hand across the table, her fingers trembling. "Thomas, please," I pulled back. I wasn't falling for it. I had given her the chance to tell the truth. And she had chosen to lie. Again, now, she had to face the consequences. Emilia's breath came in shaky gasps, her hand still reaching for mine. Pathetic. She wasn't reaching out because she loved me. She wasn't reaching out because she was sorry, she was reaching out because she had been caught. "Thomas, please," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think," I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, really?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Because I think my wife agreed to a date with a man she thought was rich. I think she got dressed up for him, put on her best perfume for him, and sat at this table waiting for him." She flinched. Her eyes darted around the restaurant, as if searching for some escape, some way to twist this into something that wasn't exactly what it was. I gestured around us. "You like the restaurant?" I asked casually. "You always told me it was too expensive. Too much for us. But you came here without hesitation, didn't you?" She swallowed hard. "Thomas, I can explain." "Go ahead," I said. "Explain." Her lips parted, but no words came out, because she had nothing. Then, after a few painful seconds, she tried anyway. "I was never going to do anything," she whispered. I just wanted to see what it felt like to be wanted again." She blinked up at me, pathetic, desperate. "To feel special." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. "To feel special," I repeated, my voice eerily calm. "Yes," she whispered, nodding quickly like she had found the perfect excuse. "That's all it was. I just wanted to feel appreciated." I let out a slow breath. "And you couldn't feel that with me?" She hesitated. And then the worst thing she could have said, "Thomas. I just needed a little excitement." I felt something in me snapped out. A little excitement, that's what this was? That's why she had betrayed me so easily, because I was boring? Because our life together wasn't enough for her? I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. She looked up at me, panic flashing across her face. That I tossed a few bills onto the table, not for her, but for the waiter. "You wanted excitement, Emilia?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "Congratulations. You got it." I turned, walking away without looking back, because I was done, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing but relief. That I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Emilia scrambling to her feet, the chair legs screeching against the floor. "Thomas, wait." Her voice was sharp with panic, but I didn't stop. I wanted her to feel it. The desperation. The helplessness. The gut-wrenching realization that she had ruined everything. That I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold night air hitting my face. My heart was pounding, not with anger, not with sadness, but with something clearer. Something final. That I was done with her. Footsteps behind me. She was chasing me now. "Thomas, please. Just let me explain." She grabbed my arm, forcing me to stop. People on the street glanced at us, sensing the tension, the mess of emotions spilling between us. That I turned to face her, and for the first time, I saw her for what she really was. Not my wife. Not my partner. Just a woman who got caught. That I didn't say anything. I just stared. Her eyes were red, her breathing uneven. Her hands trembled as she clutched my sleeve, trying to hold on to something that was already gone. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice breaking. It didn't mean anything. That sentence. That stupid, meaningless sentence. That I exhaled sharply. "You got dressed up. Put on perfume. Drove all the way here. Sat at that table, waiting for another man. And you're telling me it didn't mean anything?" She flinched. "I wasn't going to sleep with him," she insisted, voice shaky. "I just wanted to feel what?" I cut her off. "To feel special? Wanted? Excited?" I shook my head. "You didn't want excitement, Emilia. You wanted an upgrade. You thought Daniel was rich. You thought he was better than me." "No," she gasped. "That's not true." I let out a bitter laugh. "Then why did you agree to the date?" Silence. She had no answer. Because there wasn't one that I watched her, waiting to see if she'd finally tell the truth. If she'd own what she did. But she didn't. She never would, because women like Emilia don't apologize. They just lie. Again. And again. And again that I pulled my arm free from her grip, taking a step back. Her face twisted in panic. Thomas, please. I love you. I tilted my head. No, Emilia. My voice was quiet, firm. Certain. You loved the life I gave you. The security. The stability. I let the words settle. But you didn't love me. Tears pooled in her eyes. That's not true, she whispered. You just wanted to see if you could do better, I finished for her. And tonight, you learned something. I took a slow breath, letting the moment sink in. There is no better. She choked on a sob. Thomas, please. Don't do this. But I had already made my decision that I turned away, walking toward my car, leaving her standing there on the sidewalk, watching me leave her behind, and for the first time in years, I felt something I never thought I'd feel again, freedom that I didn't rush to my car. I wanted her to watch me walk away. I wanted her to feel that sinking, helpless feeling, the same feeling I had felt when I first suspected she was cheating. The moment when you realize it's over but can't do anything to stop it. She didn't follow me this time, that I could feel her eyes burning into my back, but I didn't turn around. Not once. By the time I reached my car, my hands weren't even shaking. I expected rage, sadness, something. But all I felt was a deep, overwhelming calm that I had spent too long chasing the truth. Too long pretending that maybe I was wrong. But there was no maybe anymore. I had seen who she really was. And I didn't want her. I got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot without hesitation. In my rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of Emilia. She was still standing on the sidewalk, arms wrapped around herself, her perfectly styled hair now slightly out of place, her lips parted in disbelief. She looked small, for once in her life. She wasn't in control. I turned the corner and drove away, leaving her behind for good. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't even have to check the screen. I knew it was her. I let it ring. Then, a text, Thomas, please. Let's talk. Talk? Talk about what? About how she had betrayed me the second she thought she had a better offer. About how she had been so excited for this date that she put more effort into tonight than she had into our marriage for the past 2 years. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. She wasn't worth a response, but Emilia wasn't the kind of woman who gave up easily, not when she was losing. I drove in silence, my mind racing, but not with sadness. Not with regret. With clarity. I wasn't the fool she had taken me for. I had played the game, set the trap, and watched her walk right into it. And now, she was the one falling apart. I wasn't the husband sitting at home, blissfully unaware of his wife's betrayal. I was the man who had just outplayed her, and for the first time in our entire marriage, she was the one afraid of losing me. I ignored her text. I ignored her calls. And I knew that was driving her insane. Women like Emilia aren't used to being ignored. They control. They manipulate. They win, but not this time. This time, I walked away first. I pulled into the driveway of our home. No, my home. I wasn't thinking of it as ours anymore. Because the moment she sat at that restaurant table, dressed up for another man, she had made her choice, and now, I was making mine. I stepped inside, the silence pressing against me. It should have felt lonely, but instead, it felt peaceful. A storm had left, and all that remained was clarity. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen. Emilia, Thomas, please answer. Just talk to me. I exhaled slowly. The desperation was creeping in now. The panic. She had been so sure of herself when she walked out tonight, dressed for a man she thought was richer, more exciting, but now, she had no one. I set my phone down. Still no response, and then, 20 minutes later, the front door unlocked. she was home. I stayed seated in the living room as she stepped inside, hesitating like she wasn't sure if she was welcome anymore. She looked different. Not just guilty. Not just nervous. Rattled because she wasn't coming home to the same Thomas. That I wasn't waiting for her, eager for explanations. I already knew the truth. She set her purse down carefully, like any sudden movement would make this worse. Thomas, she said softly. Can we talk? I looked up at her, meeting her eyes. Empty. Cold. Done. She swallowed hard. She was waiting for me to explode. To scream. To cry, but I wasn't giving her that. I gestured to the chair across from me. Go ahead. She hesitated, then slowly sat down. She licked her lips, stalling, trying to calculate her next move, and then, like clockwork, the lies began. It wasn't what it looked like, she whispered. I let out a short laugh. Of course, you mean it wasn't a date? I said, tilting my head. You weren't meeting a man you thought was rich? You weren't sitting at that table waiting for him? She flinched. Thomas, I leaned forward slightly. You were ready to cheat on me tonight, I said, voice sharp. Unforgiving. You just didn't get the chance. Tears welled in her eyes. Fake. Forced. No, it wasn't like that, she sniffed, trying to reach for my hand. I pulled back. She exhaled sharply. I was never going to do anything. She hesitated, searching for the right lie. I just wanted to see if I still had options. I laughed. I actually laughed. That was her defense. So let me get this straight, I said, shaking my head. You put on your best dress. You sprayed on perfume. You got in your car, drove downtown, sat at a table, and waited for a rich man because you wanted to see if you had options? She bit her lip, but she had no answer. I exhaled, shaking my head. You weren't testing your options, Emilia. I met her gaze, holding it steady. You were testing me. Seeing if you could do better. Her face crumbled because she knew I was right. Thomas, she whispered, voice shaking now. Please. I love you. It was just. I stood up, her breath hitched. You made your choice tonight, I said. And so did I. I turned, walking toward the stairs, leaving her there in the silence. She didn't follow me, because for the first time in our marriage, she was the one afraid of being left behind. I climbed the stairs without looking back. Let her sit there in the silence. Let her feel it. The weight of her own betrayal pressing down on her, with no one to pull her out of it this time. I stepped into the bedroom, our bedroom. Except it wasn't ours anymore. She didn't belong here. I could hear her downstairs. Pacing. Stopping. Starting again. She was trying to figure out her next move. How to fix this. How to manipulate the situation into something less damning. She couldn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I should have been angry. I should have been broken. But I wasn't. The truth was, I felt nothing. Maybe because I had already lost her a long time ago. The door creaked open. I didn't turn. Thomas. Her voice was small now. Not the confident, dismissive tone she used when she used to brush off my concerns. This was fear. I exhaled, rubbing my hands together. Go to bed, Emilia. She hesitated. Not like this. Please. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her stomach like she was holding herself together. She had never looked smaller. I didn't say anything. She took a shaky breath. Are you leaving me? I tilted my head. Why? Does that scare you? Her lips trembled. Yes. I let that sit for a moment. Let her feel it. Good, she should be scared. I leaned back, my expression unreadable. Why does it scare you, Emilia? Because you love me? I let the words hang in the air. Or because you're afraid of what life looks like without me? She looked away because we both knew the answer. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing the security I provided, the life I had built for her. She had spent so long looking for something better, but now that she was faced with the reality of losing what she already had, she was terrified that I shook my head. "Go to bed, Emilia." She swallowed hard. "Where are you sleeping?" I stood up, grabbed a pillow from the bed, and brushed past her without another word, and as I walked out of the bedroom, leaving her alone in the darkness, I knew this marriage was already over. I shut the guest room door behind me and locked it. Not because I was afraid of her, because I wanted her to know she wasn't welcome. I tossed the pillow onto the bed and sat down, rubbing my temples. The house was too quiet. Emilia wasn't yelling, wasn't fighting. No more excuses, no more fake apologies. Just silence, because she knew, she had spent years twisting her way out of things, lying without hesitation. She had perfected the act, innocent, fragile, misunderstood. But this time, she had no way out. That I had set the trap, and she had fallen into it willingly. Now, all she could do was sit in the ruins of the life she had destroyed. That I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. That I could feel the weight of the past 7 years pressing down on me, the moments I had ignored, the little red flags I had explained away. The feeling in my gut that had whispered something is wrong. That I had spent years believing that she loved me. But the truth was, Emilia had never loved me. She had loved the version of me that was useful to her. The man who provided for her, who made her feel secure while she kept one foot out the door, always looking for something better. And tonight, she had seen what life without me looked like, and it terrified her. A knock on the door. Soft. Hesitant. I didn't move. Another knock. Then her voice, "Thomas, please let me in." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. She still thought she could fix this. She didn't understand that I was already gone. I stayed silent. She knocked again. "Please," she whispered. "Just talk to me." I finally spoke. Cold. Even. Final. "Go to bed, Emilia." Silence, and then, slowly, I heard her footsteps retreat. For the first time in years, she had nothing to say, because she knew this wasn't a fight she could win. And as I lay there in the darkness, I realized something, that I had already let go of her, and now, it was only a matter of time before I made it official. That I woke up before the sun rose. Not because I was restless, because I had nothing left to wait for. The house was still. Too still. Emilia wasn't up yet, but I knew she'd barely slept. She was waiting. Waiting for me to come downstairs. Waiting for a chance to talk, to spin some last-minute excuse that would make me stay. She didn't know I had already made up my mind. That I got up, pulled on a shirt, and checked my phone. No messages. No calls. She had stopped trying. Maybe she finally realized that this wasn't something she could lie her way out of. I stepped out of the guest room, walked down the hall, and stopped at our bedroom door. It was closed. Good. That I wasn't interested in seeing her right now. That I went downstairs, grabbed a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. Thinking about what came next. 10 minutes passed before I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Slow. Careful. She appeared in the doorway, wearing the same clothes from last night, hair messy, face pale. She looked like she had been crying. That I took a sip of coffee. "I felt nothing. Morning," she said softly. That I didn't answer. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward the table. "Not sitting." "Not yet." She was waiting to see how I'd react. She wasn't used to this version of me. The one who didn't comfort her. "Thomas," she tried again, her voice gentle, controlled. Calculated. "Can we please talk?" I set my coffee down, finally looking at her. "About what?" She flinched at my tone but recovered quickly. "About last night." I exhaled. "There's nothing left to say." Her lips parted slightly, like she had expected something else. "Nothing," she whispered. "You're just giving up." I tilted my head. "Giving up?" I repeated. "You sat at a restaurant waiting for another man, Emilia. You gave up first." Her eyes watered. "I wasn't going to sleep with him," she whispered. "I just wanted to see if you could do better." I finished for her, she gasped, like hearing it out loud was too much for her. I shook my head. Do you even hear yourself? I asked, my voice steady. Do you understand what you did? Her hands trembled as she reached for the chair across from me, finally sitting. Thomas, I love you. I smiled. Cold. Amused. Done. No, Emilia, I said simply. You love the idea of me. You love what I do for you. But if you really loved me, you wouldn't have been sitting in that restaurant, waiting for someone else. She swallowed hard, shaking her head. It was a mistake. I let out a short laugh. A mistake? I gestured toward the doorway. A mistake is forgetting to lock the door. A mistake is leaving the oven on. I leaned in slightly. You put on your best dress. You drove downtown. You sat at that table, waiting for a man you thought was richer than me. That wasn't a mistake, Emilia. That was a choice. She broke. Finally. Her face crumpled, tears slipping down her cheeks as she gasped out, I'm sorry. I watched her cry. And for the first time in our entire relationship, I felt nothing. She wasn't crying because she was sorry for what she did, she was crying because she lost, because she knew I wasn't going to stay. That I pushed my chair back and stood up. She looked up at me, eyes wide, desperate. Thomas, she whispered. Please. We can fix this. I grabbed my coffee mug, turned away, and walked toward the sink. No, I said simply. We can't. And just like that, it was over. I stood at the sink, rinsing out my coffee mug, my back to her. She was still sitting there, waiting for a different ending. She wanted me to fight. To yell. To cry. She wanted a reaction, anything that would mean I still cared, but there was nothing left inside me for her. The silence stretched. Heavy. Suffocating. Finally, she spoke. Thomas, she whispered, voice shaking. Please. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but I don't want to lose you. I let the water run, watching it swirl down the drain. I should have felt anger. Maybe sadness. Instead, I only felt a deep, unwavering certainty. I turned, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. Why, Emilia? She blinked. Why what? I exhaled. Why do you want to fix this? I tilted my head, studying her. Because you love me? Or because you're scared of what happens next? Her breath hitched. Bullseye. She wasn't fighting for me. She was fighting for the life she was about to lose. The comfort. The security. The stability I gave her, because deep down, she had always believed that no matter what she did, I'd never leave. She thought she could get away with it, but now, for the first time in her life, she was the one being left behind. She reached for my hand across the counter, her fingers trembling. Thomas, I'll do anything. Please. Just tell me how to fix this. I stared at her hand. At the same hand that had reached for Daniel's number. At the same hand that had adjusted her dress before walking into a restaurant to meet another man, and suddenly, I knew that I wasn't her husband anymore. That I was just a man who had finally seen her for who she really was. I stepped back, letting the space grow between us. She froze. I don't want to fix this, I said, my voice calm, her face twisted in shock. You don't mean that? I nodded. I do. Her breath came fast now, her eyes darting between mine, searching, begging for a lifeline. You can't just throw away 7 years, she whispered. I let out a humorless laugh. You threw them away the moment you picked up that phone. She choked on a sob, shaking her head. Please. Just, give me one more chance. I studied her for a long moment. The tears. The desperation. The fear. She wasn't sorry for what she had done, she was sorry she had been caught, and that was unforgivable. I grabbed my keys from the counter. She shot up from her chair, panic flashing across her face. Where are you going? I turned to her, my voice steady. Unshaken, away from you. Her face crumbled that I didn't wait for her response. I walked toward the door, stepping past her without hesitation, because this wasn't a marriage anymore, this was a lesson she would never forget, and for the first time since this all began I was free. That I stepped outside, the cold morning air hitting me like a slap. It felt different. Sharper. Lighter. Like the weight I had been carrying for years had finally started to lift. Behind me, the house felt like a prison I had just escaped from. A place full of memories that meant nothing now. Because she had ruined them. That I walked to my car, my steps slow, deliberate. I half expected to hear the door burst open, for Emilia to come running after me, to grab my arm, to sob and scream and beg, but she didn't. She knew it wouldn't work, because for the first time, I was already gone. I reached the car and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Emilia, please. Don't leave. Just talk to me. I stared at the message. That I could picture her inside. Still sitting at the kitchen table. Hands shaking. Realizing she had lost. That I should have felt something, but I didn't. That I had spent years giving her every ounce of my trust, my love, my effort. And in the end, she had traded it away for the chance to feel special. For one night. That I tapped the screen. Blocked. Then I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and got into the car. That I turned the key, the engine rumbling to life, and as I pulled away from the house, from her, from the lies, from the life I thought I had, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, relief. Emilia was my past, and I was done living in the past. The road stretched ahead of me, open and empty. A perfect reflection of my future. No Emilia. No lies. No second-guessing whether the woman I loved was sneaking around behind my back, just me. I drove without a destination, the weight of the past falling away with every mile. My hands felt steady on the wheel, my chest lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, I wasn't wondering what Emilia was doing. For the first time, I didn't care. I pulled into a diner on the outskirts of town. A place I hadn't been to in years because Emilia never liked it. I stepped inside, found a booth, and ordered a black coffee. My phone sat on the table, silent. No missed calls. No texts. Because she couldn't reach me anymore, and yet, I knew exactly what was happening. Right now, she was probably pacing through the house, her phone in her hands, staring at the message that said delivered but never read. She would try again. And again, but I wouldn't see any of it, because Emilia didn't deserve my time anymore. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over names I hadn't reached out to in years. People I had drifted from. People Emilia had subtly pushed out of my life, always making excuses why we didn't need them. I found one name. Jake. My best friend before I met Emilia. We hadn't spoken in ages. Not because we fought, but because my world had revolved around a woman who didn't deserve it. I tapped the call button. It rang twice before he picked up. Thomas? His voice was surprised, cautious. Man, it's been a long time. I smiled. It really had. Yeah, I said. Too long. And for the first time in years, I made a choice just for myself. Jake and I talked for nearly an hour. Not about Emilia. Not about what happened. Just life. We caught up on years of lost time, laughed about things that felt like they belonged to another version of me. A version that existed before her, and for the first time, I realized something. I wasn't broken. I wasn't shattered. I wasn't drowning in grief. I was free. After I hung up, I sat in the diner, watching the world move around me. No pressure. No expectations. Just peace. My phone stayed silent, because Emilia was gone. For good. And in that moment, I understood something I wish I had learned years ago. Losing someone who never truly loved you isn't a loss. It's a blessing. I finished my coffee, left a tip on the table, and stepped outside. The air felt crisp, fresh, like it belonged to a new chapter. I got in my car and drove, not toward the past, but toward whatever came next. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of it, because this time, I was finally living for me.